Hey, Rabosai, we're here on Daf Peches Amid Beis, and we're up to Tzricha Get Mizeh Mizeh. So you're counting up from the bottom of the Amud, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lines up. So now what happened was that she got married based on the testimony of an aide who said that her husband died, and now her husband shows up. She needs a get from her first husband and the second husband. Bishlema Rishon Tiboy get. She certainly needs to get from her first husband because she's married to her first husband and he's alive and well. Ella Sheni Amai. Why does she need a get from her second husband? He's not a husband at all. Znus Bialma. I mean, it was an adulterous relationship out of wedlock. She can't be married to the second husband when she's married to the first. Omer Avhuna Gzera Shema Yomru Geresh Zeh V'Nasa Zeh Nimtzeis Ashes Ish Yotza below get. The spectator doesn't know that she was illegally married to the second husband. She's been living with the second husband as husband and wife for who knows how long. And he's going to assume she got a divorce from her first husband, and then she legally got married to the second husband. And now what's happening? The second husband is walking out of this marriage and she's getless. That's impossible. She has to get a get. Ihachi Seifa. Let's read the Seifa. The Ketani Amrula Meis Bailech Binis Kacha Biakach Bo Baila Muteris Lasso. They told her that her husband had died. Let's assume that 2 witnesses came. She had Kiddushin from a second husband based on the testimony of 2 witnesses that her husband's gone, but she never entered into chuppah. So it's that first stage of marriage, which is called Nesuin, Kiddushin without Nesuin. Now her husband shows up. Muteres lachzor. She's allowed to go back to her husband, first husband that she was married. Now the implication is that she doesn't need to get from the second husband because she was never really fully married to the second husband. She only had entered into Kiddushin without Nisur. So the Gemara asks, according to your logic, Asam Nami, the same Gzera that you applied before, in the case where she had a full-fledged marriage to the second husband, should apply in this case as well. Nema, because the onlooker is going to say, Geresh Zeh, the first husband delivered her a get, V'Giddish Zeh, the second husband was Makadish her, and now she's going free without a get. Then say she sees Yotzim below get. Kiddushin is enough to generate the status of an Ashes Ish. She needs a get from the second husband. So Gemara says, Liolam boy get. She needs a get from the second husband, even though there was only Kiddushin without Nesuin. So Gemara immediately asks, Hachi Nimtza Zeh Machzi Grushaso Mishinis Arso. Gemara is asking if we're afraid of the spectators and their mistakes, then we should be afraid. Shiavo Haroim Lomar Shevada Girish Rishon Iskachel L'Sheni. V'nimtza Zeh Machzi Grushaso Mishinis Arso. The onlooker is going to come to the following conclusion: the first husband must have given her a get. Otherwise, how did she receive Kiddushin from the second husband? The second husband now gave her a get, and now she goes back to her first husband. That's called Matzir Gushasa. And they're going to assume, you know what? There's no Isar Matzir Gushasa because she only got Erisin meaning Kedushin from the second husband. She wasn't fully married to the second husband. And l'chora, that's not true. The Isser of Machzir Grushasa applies even after Kiddushin to a second husband. Gemara says no. Our Mishnah reflects the Shita of Yossi ben Kippar, the Omar min Nesuin Asura min Ha'erisim Muteres, that the din of the Isser of Machzir Grushasa only applies if she had a full-fledged marriage with the second husband, then he gave her a divorce, she cannot go back to the first husband. But if there was only Kiddushin from the second husband, that's called Erisin, then Muteres, she's allowed to go back to her first husband. So again, just to summarize, the reason why we're not afraid of the spectator who's going to say, wait a minute, he's being Machzir Grushasa Mishin Isarsa, is because we're reflecting the Shita of Yossi that Machzir Grushasa Mishin Isarsa is Muteres. He's allowed to marry her again. Gemara asks the following question about Midak Tani Seifa. It says in the Seifa of the Mishnah, Afal Pi, here we're looking at Daf Peites, Shenasan La Achra. Yet, even in the case where the second husband delivered her a get, is Lo Pasla Min HaKahuna. Normally, a woman who receives a get, she's a grusha, she can never marry a Kohen. In this case, she has no Isa grusha. She can marry a Kohen. Why? Because her original husband showed up, and now we know that she was never married to the second husband. And even though he delivers her a get because he's required to be by virtue of the Gzeres Chachamim, and therefore we would have assumed that since he gave her a get, she becomes Asura LeKohen. The Torah says that Isha Grusha Lo Yikach, a Kohen is not allowed to marry a Grusha. But the pasuk, if we're very careful, says V'isha Grusha me Isha. Isha means a full-fledged husband. She received a divorce from a full-fledged husband, means after Nisuin. And in this case, the get is not a get at all. And what we're touching on, my friends, is the issue of whether or not Chachamim, when they require a get, does that give her a status of a grusha? Did the Chacham go as far as to say that it's not just Hatzrochas get, but that she's a grusha? And the nafkamina is whether she can marry a Kohen. So the Gemara now is Medaik Michlal. By implication, I can derive to lo boy get. The boy get amai lo pasla min hakuna. The Gemara thinks that once the Rabbanan require a get, then ipso facto she becomes a grusha and she cannot marry a Kohen. How then is it possible that the Mishnah could say lo pasla min hakahuna? You're telling me that she needs a get from the sheni. Why is she not psula min hakahuna? Ella. Now the word Ella here means that the Gemara is now completely rejecting its original position. And the Gemara is assuming now that in the Sefer, when she only had Kedushin to the Sheni, she does not need a get. And now the question is, what do you mean she doesn't need a get from the Sheni? The people are going to think she was married legally to the Sheni. The first one gave her a get, and she's leaving the marriage up and packing up bags without a get? The answer is that Sefer, in the Sefer case, where she only had Kedushin to the Sheni, and we're not afraid that if she goes back to the Rishon below get, why is that? The Amri, the Roim will say, when they see that she's getting out of the marriage of the Sheni without a get, Kiddushay Tos Havi, it was not a valid marriage. Why? Because there was some mistake. For example, let's say a woman accepts Kiddushin from a man because she thinks he's a Kohen. Yeah, this one, she wants to marry Kohen. And as it turns out, it was a bluff. And he's a Yisrael, he's not a Kohen. In such a case, we have Kiddushay Tos. People ask, does the halacha recognize annulling a marriage? There's no such thing as annulling a marriage. You need a get or a misas habal. But there is such a thing called Kiddushay Tos, when we can establish that the entire premise of the marriage was mistaken. She thought she was marrying a Kohen, and she got a second fiddle Yisrael. And therefore, they're going to assume she left the second husband without a get and went back to her first husband. It must have been a Kiddushay Tos. It was a mistake. It was a fluke in the original understanding of the marriage. So the Gemara says now, I don't understand your whole position here. If she was married to the Sheni, full-fledged marriage, the Mishnah says she needs a get from the Sheni. Why? Because otherwise people are going to say the spectator is Eishes Ish Yotze below get. Why won't they come to the conclusion that the Kedusha to the Sheni was Kedushay Tos? You've basically undermined the entire premise of the Shema Yomru, which was the whole reason to actually the whole purpose of requiring a get from the Sheni. But there's no Shema Yomru. You're telling me that from the Sefer you derive the conclusion that the spectator is going to think she was never married to the Sheni. It was a Kedushay Tos. So you've done away with Shema Yomru, Isha Yotzes below get, Isha Sis Yotzes below get. Reisha Nami, Amri Nisui Tos, how we will assume that the people will interpret the lack of a get as a Kedushay Tos situation. The Gemara answers that in the Reisha, when she got married to the Sheni, the reason why she needs a get is Kansua Rabbanon. This was a special penalty imposed by the Chachamim to require a get from the Sheni because of the Shema Yomru Eishes Ish Yotze below get. So because of this knas, but she didn't do her due diligence, and as it turns out, her husband was alive and well. Therefore, they're not going to rely on the Roim saying that the Nisuin to the Sheni was Kedushay Tos. So when I ask Sefer Nami Lik Nisuah, okay, what about in the Sefer? She got married to the second guy, albeit without Nisuin, but why didn't she do her research and investigation? She's worthy of a knas, and therefore we should not rely on the fact that the spectator will say that it was a mekatos, and we should require a get. My answer is Reisha the of the Surah Kansua, safe of the Surah, lo Kansua Rabbana. In the Reisha, she entered into a full-fledged marriage relationship with the second husband. And that's called an Isa. Because her husband, as it turns out, is still alive. And she should have known better. The Seifa, she already consummated the marriage with the second husband after, I'm sorry, did I say Seifa? I meant to say Reisha. Right, so the Reisha, where she consummated the marriage with her second husband, then she deserves a knas because she violated an Isser here. She's basically an Eishes Ish having a relationship with another man. And she should have known better because her husband, as it turns out, is really alive. But in the Seifa, she didn't violate an Isser. She doesn't deserve a knas because she never entered into a chuppah with the second husband. And lo kansur rabbanon, and the roim, the spectators, are going to assume not that HC Joseph will get, but that the second kedusha was a kedusha tov. The Ritva says, "Lo sof davar of the isura mamish nivola elakevich nichnas lechupa achol pishalo nivola." We don't necessarily assume that she had bia, but rather she entered into the chuppah. That's enough to generate an avera and a knas. Now, why is it that knisa lechuppah is considered an avera? So for that, we have to turn to the Yalkut Abiurim. Steve, you have a photocopy of the Yalkut Abiurim?
Yeah, I don't have as far as we've got.
Okay. And I'll tell you where we're up to in just a minute. We're on Peites, right? Peites begins on Yud Beis. Find the exact paragraph that we need. Not finding it clearly here. Probably sort of sandwiched into one of these paragraphs. I apologize here. I don't see it. Not sure where it disappeared in. We'll have to look at that. Now the Mishnah says that in the case where she claims that her husband died and she got married, now her husband came back alive and well, ein lo ksuba, right? So normally a husband writes a ksuba to a woman when he enters into the chuppah to the surin, and she collects that ksuba when he dies or when he divorces her. So the Gemara now asks, why do we penalize her and undermine her ksuba. She cannot collect her ksuba. My time at tekinu le rabbanon ksuba today shelo te kalabeno be'otzia ha tehe kalabeno be'otzia. That's the whole purpose of the ksuba. The takonas chachamim of ksuba is to inhibit a husband from divorcing his wife. He gets angry. She burnt the toast. She wants to divorce. Slow down, friends. It's going to cost you a pretty penny. But in this case, where she said that her husband died and she got married to a second husband, and now her first husband came back, on the contrary, the Rabbanon want that shetehei kalabein of lotzia, that it should be very easy for him without any hesitation to divorce her. That's the nature of the knas. So there's no takonis ksuba in this case. Just here's something missing. In lo ksuba. Right, the Mishnah says, let's go back to the Mishnah for a second. In lo ksuba lo miseh v'lo miseh, all right? It just says Ein Lo Ksuva. Go back to Ein Lo Ksuva for a minute, because I think it means Ein Lo Ksuva Lo Miseh Lo Miseh. Did I make a mistake? Let's see, I have a footnote here. S. Not finding it. I haven't been lucky today with finding things that I'm looking for. Mishnah says Ein Lo Peros, and he writes here, this we do have, Afilu Peros Ha'ochal Hasheni Mi Nichse Meluk Shalo Ein Tzarech Lachziram Ol Sham Lo Dmeim. So it means that during the course of the marriage to the Sheni, he ate her peros. Let's say, for example, she brought in an apartment into the marriage, and he rented out the apartment. He gets all those rental fees. He doesn't have to return it to her. And in the footnote, he writes, "Afal gav de'em lo ksuba, mishum d'Rabbanan kansua." This is also part of the knas. Below mazonos, and she doesn't get any support. And once again, he has a note here that Afim loves her kesef, shahaisa tachto, the konsa avura mazonos, ein baila chayv l'shalom. She took a loan while she was married to the second husband. And with those monies, she bought mizonos. Normally, she has to get reimbursed by her husband. But here, the husband doesn't have to reimburse her. And any monies that she borrowed, she'll have to pay. Pay the lender. Below blows. Which are begadim shebalu v'nishchaku. Her clothing became a little bit what's the word I want to use? Disintegrated. So the Gemara now gives a simple explanation that covers all the different cases of knas. And that is Tanai Ksuba Sheksuba Kiksuba Dom. All these obligations that we mentioned, like Peros and Mizonos, and the Ikar Ksuba, this is all Kiksuba Dom. And since she lost her Ksuba, then we're not going to give her any of the Tanai Ksuba, any of the additional laws of Ksuba. Just try to learn a little bit more, then we'll stop. Notla, Mizeh Mizeh. She went ahead and she collected a ksuba or her peros or any of those monies that were subject to her penalty. Mizeh Mizeh, from either the first husband or the second, she's got to reimburse that. Shita, certainly when you take something and it's not legally yours, because the Rabbanan instituted a knas, then you have to reimburse the person from whom you took it. It's like a thief. Now the time I would have thought Keva the tafsa lo mafkina mine. She grabbed her ksuba or her peros. We're not going to take it out of her hands. That far we don't go. Amash Malon, the Mishnah is saying no. They considered even in this case where she grabbed the money and she ran with it. We're going to take it out of her possession. Okay, then, so let's just make a note of where we get up to here on Daf Pei Tes. We're up to Avlad Mams. Okay, then I'll wish you a great day. Thank you so much.